It's a real treat to have you on with us. So we're celebrating John Muir's birthday today. In some ways, I feel like this is the only event for John Muir, and I haven't really heard of anything else because I think Earth Day is kind of like taking over tomorrow. But there's a lot of obviously other news that we've been kind of dealing with. We've been living in this kind of weird world for the last couple months, and so what I'd like to talk about is just a little bit of how maybe John Muir would handle death. Just kind of jump into that right now and not beat around the bush. So I'd like to ask Harold to kind of step into this, and each of you, if you could, when I ask you, if you could just introduce yourself, otherwise they'll be seeing me speak. So if Harold, if you want to just kind of go into maybe a presentation on John Muir and death.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Michael. My name is Harold Wood. I'm the webmaster of the Sierra Club John Muir exhibit website. So I hope many of you are familiar with that. It's the largest website, I think, on John Muir on the internet, and try to keep developing new things with it all the time. And it's become a portal for me to contact a lot of you folks. So over the years. So I've been studying some of John Muir's views on death in recent years because I got interested in the Green Burial movement, among other things. And, we live in a society that's very adverse to talking about death. As a society, we generally don't want to talk about it unless we're forced into it because of confronting it in our own family. And this COVID-19 pandemic is beginning to force us to consider it. And I've been trying to message people, do you really want a conventional funeral where you're put into a box full of toxic materials that's buried into the earth with a concrete vault and embalmed, that's going to be toxic gallons going into the waste stream? There's a natural way of doing it. And John Muir kind of did that himself in his site. So this is just a picture that I took of John Muir's grave, which you can see. He is buried in this little corner, which is now owned by the National Park Service, and some of the other family members there. You can see this is on a website, on our John Muir exhibit website that I do. Created this page on John Muir's gravesite because there's been a lot of interest over the years for people who want to come visit and pay respects to John Muir's gravesite. And for many years, it was in private ownership. And even today, it's very hard to visit because it's located in a kind of a suburban area surrounded by private homes. There's no sidewalks. There's no real easy way to get in. So thankfully, the National Park Service has figured out a way that they have van tours and small groups that can take a van from the John Muir National Historic Site in Martinez to this grave site, which is about a mile away, and allow visitors to come and learn about Muir's grave site. So you can see Muir is buried in this site. I have a lot of text here, which is because I'm a word-oriented person instead of a visual person. So this is just some of the grave site you can see if you've ever got to visit. That's his headstone, which was made of granite, and you can see the floral design. It's the Scotch thistle. He always appreciated his Scotch heritage, as you know, all of his life. It's buried next to his wife, Louie, and who predeceased him, and his great father-in-law is buried there as well, and that's the biggest monument there for his father-in-law, Dr. John Strentzel. And then here's a picture of Robert Hanna from a descendant of Muir, the great-great-grandson of John Muir. It's one of the few that can go inside these iron gates because he's a family member. The site has been visited by many people over the years. You can see here John Burroughs, the naturalist John Burroughs, paying respect with Muir's friend Charles Keeler. If you'll remember, Charles Keeler was John Muir's roommate on the Harriman expedition to Alaska. So you can see how wild this looks as a gravesite compared to our highly manicured graves that we have so often today. Over the years, you can see people have visited. This is one of the annual gatherings. This one's from 1957, where all of John Muir's grandchildren and 17 of his great-grandchildren were in attendance. But there were visits right after, from his death on, almost every year by the Sierra Club in the area, who would go year after year as a pilgrimage to John Muir's gravesite. He was really beloved by a lot of our early Sierra Club leaders. So here's a picture of myself there on the left with Lee Stetson, who performs John Muir in Yosemite so inimitably. So we had a nice visit there a few years ago. Here's a picture of Bill Swaggerty on the right, professor at the University of the Pacific who teaches John Muir classes. And there on the left, you see Ross Hanna, his grandson, who's now deceased. And I just have information about the Park Service management. There's a video clip on how it's open for tours at this time. So it's just kind of a useful thing. And then I guess the last thing I just wanted to show you was I created this page of John Muir quotes on death. And I'm happy to send this to any of you. It's on the web page. If you actually go to the John Muir gravesite page, you can download it. But many of Muir's death quotes, some of them are quite humorous. I'll read one of them from his book Stikine, where he's talking about the little dog Stikine. He's up on the glacier, and they narrowly escaped death from his account. And Muir told little Stikine, "We must risk our lives to save them. At the worst, we can only slip. And then how grand a grave we will have. And by, our nice bones will do good in the terminal moraine." So the ultimate recycling. Muir would have liked to have his bones recycled into a glacier, but that didn't happen. But Muir also has a lot of inspirational quotes, and I'll just read a couple of them and then open it up for any questions or discussion. But his view of death was so different than many of us today who have a fear of death and an unwillingness to talk about it. Muir said, "Death is a kind nurse saying, 'Come, children, to bed, get up in the morning,' a gracious mother calling her children home." And he said, "On no subject are our ideas more warped and pitiable than of death. Instead of the friendly sympathy, the union of life and death so apparent in nature, we are taught that death is an accident, a deplorable punishment for the oldest sin, the arch enemy of life, etc., etc. But let children walk with nature. Let them see the beautiful blendings and communions of death and life, their joyous inseparable unity as taught in woods and meadows, plains and mountains and streams of our blessed star, and they will learn that death is stingless indeed, and as beautiful as life, and that the grave has no victory, for it never fights. All is divine harmony." Well, and this goes on. I'll just, a snippet from one of his comments I think exemplifies his view about death was that he said, when you spend time in nature, you see that what looks like waste and destruction, like dead trees you see in the forest, those are actually life forms flowing from use to use, beauty to yet higher beauty. We soon cease to lament waste and death, and rather rejoice and exult in the imperishable, unspendable wealth of the universe, and faithfully watch and wait the reappearance of everything that melts and fades and dies about us, feeling sure that its next appearance will be better and more beautiful than the last.
Wow. So let's follow that up with one of our spiritual folks on here. How about Roger, the death?
Well,
if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself too, and where you're connecting in from.
Sure. I'm Roger Woolsey. I'm a United Methodist pastor. I was in Boulder, Colorado the last 14 years doing campus ministry at the University of Colorado at the Wesley Foundation. Currently in Iowa City, where I'm writing a book on the days that I'm actually writing. And then I'll be going back to Colorado in June for a new ministry in Grand Junction. For 14 years, I was at that campus ministry, and many of those years I ran a ministry we called Nature Church, where we took people out into the foothills, and we mostly were in silence and just letting nature do the speaking, very much in the spirit of John Muir. And, you know, I did a little research. John Muir, of course, died. He died on Christmas Eve, and I believe it was 1914. And the newspaper article in the LA Times, I've got the obituary, there's a tribute to him. Apparently he died of double pneumonia. So had he been exposed to COVID-19, odds are he would have been a COVID-19 victim. It's a pneumonia of the lungs that mostly is what's taking people who are dying of that. So I'm just noticing had he been around now, he likely might have died of the same kind of lung experience. And I'm pondering what I know of him and what I think about death and what he might suggest to us. I don't think he'd be one of these people who would say, let's sacrifice our lives for the sake of the economy. At the same time, I don't think he'd be allergic to death by itself. The idea of dying of a viral cause, arguably maybe nature doing a course correction, taking care of itself, that's a big meta perspective. It's not fair to say those words when we have so many people dying right now. That doesn't feel like that's why this is happening, but you can sort of have a lens of seeing a larger picture. And I suspect Muir would, if he were to die of COVID-19 with that larger perspective, I think he would do so gracefully and invite us to embrace our own deaths without fear either. But I don't think he'd be one of these people saying, let's just sacrifice our lives for the sake of the economy. So it's a mixture of voices that I think I'm hearing from him. I don't know if that resonates with you all, but that feels right to me.
So Roger, let me. I'm just going to try to balance this back and forth between the kind of the Muir scholar and more of this kind of the spiritual approach
Sure.
to this. And we have a couple different people on here that are more on the spiritual side of things, and then we have people that kind of do both. And that the next person I would ask is Stephen Hatch to speak to John Muir and to how John Muir thought about death. So Steve, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Stephen Hatch, and I live in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I teach at Naropa University, which is actually a Tibetan Buddhist university in Boulder. And when I read Muir, I'm taking a contemplative perspective or a meditative perspective. And in meditation, of course, you identify more with a spaciousness, a spacious awareness, and you don't constrict around your thoughts. The thoughts don't go away, but you find they have some air to them. They can breathe. They become transparent. So when I read Muir and him talking about death, I picture him identifying more with the wide spaciousness of the landscape and then situating death inside of that. I think there's a passage where he talks about the death and life being like stars that are born and then die, maybe meteors and shooting stars. And in the context of the sky, they're just a part of that whole reality. So it seems that he would identify more with the sky rather than the stars. There's a couple cases where I remember him talking about petrified forest. One was in Yellowstone and the other was in Arizona. And of course, he went to Arizona, to the petrified forest area after his wife died. And he seemed to find a lot of consolation in the midst of all of the beauty there. And he looked at those trees that died and then saw them petrified in these rainbow colors, you know, that they would appear in. So you get the sense that he's looking at this sort of larger spaciousness and this eons of geological time and situating death inside of that. Another thing that comes to mind is he was once observing a carcass. I don't remember if it was a bighorn sheep or something. And he was looking at the flies that were all over it. And here he is, instead of talking about the smell of the carcass, he's describing the rainbow hue of the wings of all of the flies that are all over the carcass. So it seems to me when I read him, he's always looking at the spaciousness in which both death and life occurs, and identifying more with the spaciousness and the wider landscape and the eons of geological time than with the individual lives. Similar to the way in meditation, we find victory over the sort of claustrophobia of our afflictive emotions by identifying more with the spaciousness than with the afflictive emotions.
Wow, that's good. So I'm going to jump to Shelton down here. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and see if there's something that you could share from, your work-a-day life in Yosemite, where death does occur on many different levels?
Yeah. Well, my name is Shelton Johnson. I've worked as a park ranger since 1987. Beginning in Yellowstone, most of my career has been actually in Yosemite for the last almost 25 years, but I worked in Yellowstone for about 7 years. But you can't really work in a national park anywhere in the United States and not hear about John Muir, because he's usually put in the position of being the father of our national parks and so forth. But what I have to say really about Muir specifically is that when you work in Yosemite Valley, the place that he described as a cathedral, as a chapel, there's a sacredness to Yosemite that you can feel. You can feel it through his writing, but you can also feel it in person when you're actually in that space. That space becomes something that also inhabits you at the same time. And so it's one thing to read about Muir, but it's another thing to read about Muir in Yosemite Valley, or to read about Muir in Tuolumne Meadows, to read his writings in the space that he occupied. There's this recognition that he's still there in that space to some degree, because there's an echo of his voice that's in that environment that you're walking through. So I feel like that Muir is still there. He's still around me. He's still around all the people who come to visit Yosemite. He's a bit on the intangible side, but his presence is definitely, I think, felt there, not just through Lee Stetson performing as John Muir in his shows, but literally that environment, his presence is there as well. But I have to say though, that it's important to keep in mind that indigenous people have been in that area for literally thousands of years. And so obviously they had a different relationship with nature, a different relationship with the landscape itself. But there are some interesting parallels between John Muir and a more of an indigenous point of view with regard to spirit. And I think that that's important as well to communicate, because even though he comes from this more European tradition in terms of how we look at the land, or how he looks at the land, there are a lot of parallels between himself and a more of an indigenous, ancestral, more of that ancient way of looking at the world. It's not being separate from it, but being united with it in some way. And I can feel that when I read his words, when I read his writings. And that comes across even stronger when you actually are occupying that space. That's his favorite space. That was his cathedral, Yosemite Valley. And so being in that environment, you can literally, when you read him, the words have more resonance. There's more of a sound, there's more of a feeling to them, there's an energy to them that's there when you're reading his words in that environment, because you can feel more easily what he felt when he was in that space as well.
And for all those who have been to Yosemite, let's raise your hands. Let's see a show of hands. Ooh, a couple have not, which is good.
It's actually illegal to not have visited Yosemite. That's a new rule that's just been passed. So just wanted to share. You have to go.
Yeah. So Sheldon, you're talking about spirit, and I think that's a good segue to me introducing Carol Beccarello, and she can speak about spirit and that connection in a way that I think is unique. And today she was talking about maybe doing a pilgrimage to all the national parks.
Yes,
So,
well,
Carol.
a little bit about me. I'm a clergywoman. I'm associated with the United Church of Christ right now, and I work with an experimental community called Heart Space. My first love is creation spirituality, and that's how I met Michael, and it's been a good thing. So for me, when I was just thinking about all this, in him being sheltered at home here now too, you know, out there in my yard, that's my family. So I don't feel alone ever. People will, because I live alone all the time. And I love to live alone because it's when I'm the most alive with all that really is part of my life. And in my backyard, there's a prayer lodge, a prayer wheel, a sacred fire. We do a lot of Native American spirituality here because we've been trained in that way. And that's another way that we really connect with the sacred here in the yard. I don't know how to, what I'm aware of is when I talk about it, it's just words. But when I live it, it's so much more. And it's nothing I can explain with words. I turned it down before we started so that it wouldn't distract us, but there's a plant behind me right now that's singing, and I'm listening to it sing. We now have the technology that allows us to hear the vibrations of the plants around us that are singing to us all the time, but we don't have the capability to be able to hear them. And now we do with this new technology. And it's incredible. This little plant has been singing since the week before Easter it started, and it has not stopped 24/7. Before that, it didn't sing for a couple of months. I can't tell it when to sing. The reason I'm sharing this with you, it's got its own life. I don't know how to, I don't want to anthropomorphize, and I don't want to say that I think it's a person like we're people, but it is. It is a being. And if it has a mind, it makes up its mind. Sometimes it's like a little kid. I'll ask it to sing. It refuses to sing, sometimes for months. And then all of a sudden one day I'll say, okay, I'm tired of asking you. And I walk away and it starts. It's just like a little kid says, okay, you're not going to push me anymore. I'm going to do it. So this is the world that I live in. I'm surrounded by the plants in the house, by the spirit out of the house. And all of this to me is spirit. I talk to them all the time. When my mother lived with me before she died, she would say to me, who are you talking to? And I thought, isn't that strange? My own mother doesn't know who I talk to, but she didn't. She had no clue. So I had to teach her about the spirits of the place, the sacred spirits that we live with all the time. And some people would say I'm crazy. It's okay. I don't care. I'm old enough that it doesn't matter anymore. I would rather be this kind of crazy. And when we talk about death, see, to me, that word, oh gosh, we have so abused that word. To me, death is just the portal to another way of being alive, another manifestation of what we already are. I have to say, I mourned horribly when one of the huge trees, I bought this house because of the trees here. The realtor would laugh at me. He'd say, well, the house on Harvard. No, the one with the big tree, the one with the smoke bush in the front and the big tree in the back. He's okay, that's the house. But I came here because of the trees. And when that tree gave its life a couple of years ago, I cried and cried. I lost my best friend. That's the tree that I prayed with, that I prayed under. And the day before it was coming down, I went out with my little machine so that it could sing to me. It sang to me and it was so happy. And I said, how can you be so happy when you know that they're going to have to take you down because you're falling down? It was huge. It was going to take out 2 houses. And you know what it told me? It said, I have to go. And I said, why do you have to go? He said, so you can blossom. I said, no, I promise you I'll blossom even if you're here. He said, no, I have to go. And then that day, I will never forget it. And I've actually got it on tape. A hawk came by and called out and circled back and called out. It never did that before or since. I know it came to say goodbye. So this is the world I live in. It's a world densely spiritual, It's a world totally connected. There are some times, I'm a pilgrim. I've walked across Spain a couple of times. And when I do, it's amazing, the connection with spirit in a place that I don't know, because that's where I have to radically trust that the spirits of all of those places are going to hold me and take care of me, because I always do it alone. I won't go with anybody else because I have to be with my spirit family. That's when I thrive. So I'll be quiet.
I think you can kind of see how I've mixed everybody together here with a really beautiful way of kind of balancing out what I think are the qualities of John Muir. You know, and I think, you know, on his birthday, and, you know, the reason I made this film, Unruly Mystic John Muir, was I wanted to connect to the essence that I felt when I was a young man reading his books, that essence that I feel when I go to Yosemite and I'm just drawn up to Vernal Falls, and there's no fatigue or anything. It's just this energy that just flows through me and flows through everything there. And, you know, there has been, you know, I get a sense sometimes like some people think that John Muir is not relevant anymore, but when John Muir is not relevant anymore, nature won't be relevant to us. And in each of you, you know, each of you share that relevancy of your connection to nature, your connection to everybody. And I think it's so important that we do have somebody that we can look back at, you know, was born 182 years ago, who is our kind of our mystic and a reminder of this connection that we have to nature. And COVID, you know, COVID is really kind of identified for all of us that how incredible nature is, you know, and you know, there's so much hardship that's coming out of that, but that is part of nature. And we are just, you know, we're just affected by it in a way that has really, you know, that's causing death, it's causing economic hardship, but it's also causing us to recognize that within a couple months, a month, we can actually affect the climate again. You know, I mean, I just find that somewhat amazing that we're seeing clearer airs, cleaner waters, the wildlife is coming out within months, not years. You know, so if it's a matter of reducing our economy by 30%, less driving, less travel, less flying, you know, we can do things to make the world cleaner, you know, nature cleaner. So I kind of want to go from this concept of death, you know, and how John Muir relates to it, to the spirituality of death, which we've just talked about, to how each of us is handling this isolation. And I think Carol talked about, you know, how nature is just outside her door. You know, John Muir, and we'll start with John Muir again. John Muir really talked about wilderness. And so I'd kind of like to start with the idea of what wilderness is, and then see if we can bring it back into our homes. So who wants to go with this one first? Shelton.
Well, the only reason why I raised my hand, I think it's good to start out by mentioning just the fact that for indigenous cultures throughout the world, as far as I can tell, there's no parallel word to describe what we use the word wilderness to describe. There's no separation between themselves and the external world. They're so much a part of it. There is not that separation. And I think that one of the reasons why we have this kind of adversarial relationship with nature is that for so long we've looked at it as a utility. We've looked at it as a resource. And personally, I hate the word resource. No one would describe their mom or their dad as a resource. You know, they're your parents. They're part of your family. And I think that for indigenous people, there's that same kind of emotional, ancestral, psychological, spiritual, physical connection to the outside world to such an extent that there is no real separation. So I think a lot of this obviously is rooted in the birth of agriculture and naming things wild versus things that have not been tamed in that manner. But I think it's important to start out by just looking at what we think of and what we envision when we use words like wilderness, and how those labels can also confine the way that we look at the world, the way that we relate to the world, and the way that we unfortunately treat the world. It's all tied to our specific vision and our collective vision of nature.
So what's the history of the word wilderness in terms of the founding of our national parks? How important is that in terms of the parks, that there is wilderness?
Well,
the idea of wilderness.
Yeah, the thing to keep in mind is that when you look at the etymology of the word wilderness, if it's like wildy or there's a deer, I always love the idea there's literally a deer hiding in the word wilderness. Why wouldn't it be hiding? It's a prey species. There's something in a predatory way that's after it. But I love the idea that something that is so enchanting in some regard is literally lurking and hiding in the language itself that we use to describe it. So when you look at the first national parks, and of course sometimes people always argue that Yellowstone's the first national park on March 1st, 1872, but I always counter that by saying Yosemite Valley precedes Yellowstone because of the Yosemite Grant in 1864. But the key thing is that national parks came into being around the same time that the Western frontier was being declared closed. So there's something that's really powerful about that we as a nation were shaped by these wild landscapes. What it means to be an American was shaped by prairies and forests, whether they're coniferous forests or deciduous forests, whether it's desert, whether it's a river system. We've been shaped by that one-on-one contact with the natural world. And that, to me, is what makes an American separate from other nations, is that you can almost embody much of human history just in the few hundred years that the United States has been in existence. So I think that when the first parks were created, Yellowstone, Sequoia, and Yosemite, and so forth, they all were very wild. Kings Canyon was the first wilderness park in 1940. So you can't really talk about the national parks without talking about these open, wild environments that also shaped the character of the people who shaped those environments. And I think that's an important point, that in the shaping of the United States as a nation, we were shaped by the continent itself. We were shaped by the landscape itself. And I think that you can't talk about one without talking about the other. So I just wanted to start out by saying that, because I think it's important to keep that in mind, because for indigenous people, as far as I know, they don't have a corollary. They don't have a parallel term for wilderness. There's no separation. They never left Eden. They're still there. But in the West, we do have that separation. And I think that that's an important point to communicate. Just a real quick aside, when I was in the Peace Corps, I taught 7th grade English in Liberia, West Africa. And the thing that I found interesting is that all my students were bilingual, and they all had a name for everything that was green and growing around them. But they didn't know the name for it in English. They knew the name in their own ancestral language. And they were still there. They were still part of it. And now, here in the United States, most people don't have that kind of fluency with wildness. They have to go back into it. But there are populations, there's cultures out there. Eden, they didn't call it Eden because they come from a different culture, but they're still in that space of collaboration, connection, and fluency with the world around them. And I think that's an important point to make out. And even though sometimes John Muir was seemingly, when you hear about him and read about him, and his relationship with indigenous people and some of the commentary or comments that he made, there was a definite connection in terms of sensibility, in terms of how they all looked at the land and the importance and the emotional connection that they all felt towards the land. So I just felt that was important to start out with that statement.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting is people right now feel like they need to get out, right? There's this kind of cabin isolation going on. This idea that, we can't get into nature, and, they're closing parks and, Yosemite's closed. But I think that when you can kind of connect with nature in the wildness of your home, when the wilderness of your backyard, you're going to be in a better space, right? I know when I was in my 20s, I'd want to go up the mountain right now. I mean, so I don't know if it's because I've gotten older. I'm not so worried about it. So I'm just curious for some of the people on the panel, I was talking to Stephen about this, what are you doing to kind of do your practice, of getting out? Because I really kind of want to see this as a way to support other people that it may be difficult for them. Matthew Fox talked about, we are nature, nature is all around us. And he said that as looking out of a window in New York City, looking at the bricks, the metal, everything that we've actually created. So Stephen, what are you doing to kind of like nurture that connection you need for nature?
Well, first of all, with the backyard, I just think I'm more aware now of the birds that are arriving, especially after in the spring migration. I feel like I'm more aware of the weather changes. Here in Colorado, we go from snow to, emerald green grass in a matter of a couple days in the spring. So I think there's just more of a connection for me for what's going on in the yard and which creatures are visiting and which are a part of it. Some people see squirrels as a pain, with bird feeders. And I think, well, they're part of our ecosystem too. And they usually just eat a couple times a day and then they leave and the other birds come. I live on the edge right next to the foothills. So there's some open spaces here. It's pretty easy to go out the door and within a few minutes be up on some trails that are open. We have a lot of state parks and county parks that are open right here. So that's been really helpful. Today I was up on the ridge that we can see just to the west of us. I'm looking out over the expanse of the mountains to the west, the high mountains, and that was really wonderful. And there's a lot of people doing that right now. Everybody is trying to get out in their county to be in those spaces more. But I think with everyone, there's just more appreciation of what's going on in your own yard.
Yeah, I noticed that in terms of like going for a walk, I'm starting to see things I normally don't see. And I've like done the walk maybe like 100 times now. And I'll be looking at someone else's yard. I'll be like, oh, I hadn't really seen that before. I wonder why. But it's like this, there is this sense of like really slowing down. We've actually gone back. I feel like we've gone back in time like 100 years, except we have technology to do this. So, yeah, Harold.
Well, I just want to speak to that point because here in California right now, the golden poppies are really blooming, and many of my neighbors have, wild poppies growing up that are, volunteers, or somebody may have planted them, but year by year, there's more and more of them. And I celebrated John Muir's birthday this morning by driving out, doing a country drive since Sequoia National Park is closed, even though it's close to me. I just went up a different road that hardly anyone else was on. And I saw like 4 cars and they were trucks that were the local ranchers in that area. And there's no tourists, but saw lots of poppies, lots of beautiful Sierra foothills. And John Muir loved that kind of environment too. You always think of the sequoia trees and the high peaks that he liked, but he also liked some of those low elevation. But I'll tell you, the best way I'm connected to nature right now is every day I go onto Facebook and I see Stephen Hatch's photographs, and every day I'm interspersed into nature. And so thank you, Stephen, for posting them. There's always several a day, I think, and I can always rely on that. Beautiful photography. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I would also give a pitch here to Shelton too. If you guys are on Instagram, you could follow his postings from Yosemite and Mariposa and thereabouts, right, Shelton?
Yep, that's right. It's become an obsession.
Yeah. So I think it would be, if it's okay with you guys, I'd like to kind of ask the question to some of the other people that are on this call with us. If what are they doing to connect with nature, and then kind of fulfilling that connection they need. So if you have questions, or if you want to maybe share something, I'd be curious to hear you. And maybe while you think about that, I'll ask Roger to kind of, in Iowa City, what are you doing? You poor former Colorado boy. Oh, you're muted.
When I hear about Stephen's photos, I also have been a fan of his photos over the years. And when I was in Boulder, I took a lot of my own photos. And I found myself occasionally wincing, it almost hurts to see those beautiful photos, and it makes me homesick for Colorado. But the prairie of the Midwest has its own beauty and its own charms. It's a subtler, less pronounced, dramatic, but it's no less lovely. And I'm getting more of an ear for the bird calls, the red-winged blackbirds, and distinguishing that from the robin, distinguishing that from the sparrow, and having a more refined ear than I used to have. And there's a lot of moisture here, so there's frogs. Frogs are chirping all over the place, but not so much in Colorado. It's too arid for frogs. But there's whole choruses of frogs that are, you can lose yourself in here. And little brooks and streams. And so my camera is getting used. It's just noticing the more subtle in comparison to the dramatic. One thing I'll share, I posted just a link here. It says rewilding, re-earthing ritual, sacramental dirt in the midst of a sterile era. I did a little video last week, sort of introducing the online cooped up community to a little flavor of what we did in Nature Church, where we would sit, we'd walk in silence for 20 minutes and then sit for about 40 minutes in silence and then have some rituals. And one of the rituals was helping remember that we are not separate from nature, that we are earthy, we are Adam, of the earth, dirt creatures. And so instead of the traditional religious rituals of washing and cleanliness, and we're washing our hands a lot, we've got that down lately, but what's good for us is to remember we're not a sterile system. You know, there's creatures that live on us. There's a symbiotic relationship with all kinds of bacteria inside and out. And if we're too sterile, we're actually harming ourselves and reducing our immune system. So a way I was inviting people to do is to find their house plants, or maybe some ashes from a fire, or maybe some coffee grounds, and then actually engage in that ritual of re-earthing yourself and you know, intentionally putting some dirt on yourself. And you know, it's not what you are expected to do in society right now, but there is something good about being in the dirt. And if you have a garden, obviously, maybe it's time to start planting and working the soil. But if you're in an apartment, and a lot of city dwellers don't have access to that, it's something as simple as getting into some dirt from your potted plant and remembering that you are not separate from it, and kind of owning through a sacramental way the essential goodness of dirt and earth, and remembering that we're not separate from that. So that's a little thing that I put out there recently. And more practically, what I do is to sometimes walk barefoot outside, just being even closer to the earth and letting the earth do its magic with the soles of my feet. And somehow, even if it's chilly, I don't do it for a long time, maybe just 15, 20 minutes, but it somehow makes a difference. I don't really talk about that, but it's because it feels a little weird, but it's something that I do, and it's easy to do, and it actually makes a profound shift in my system. So that's something that I've been doing.
Great, thank you. So any of the participants want to share what you're doing in terms of your connection to nature while you're being isolated?
My connection to Muir is I am a mystic. So Stephen Hatch explains things, and he's far better spoken than I. I get up every morning before the sun so that I can watch the sunrise. I live on the water's edge, and east is across the water from me. So I have a Facebook page. My name is James Siebold, and I have a Facebook page, and on that page, I post pictures every day of the water birds, of the sunrise, of my experience of nature at the beginning of every day. In the reality that I live in, there is only life. The life that you are, and the life that I am, the life that John Muir is, the life that Stephen Hatch is, the life that those water birds are, and those trees, is just life. We are expressions of that life. And so I find humility and great joy in being here with you folks. I am experiencing tremendous gratitude. So thank you so much for doing this. And all I can say is that I have been in practically nearly every national park in the United States. And I have traveled in them for years, and I've retired. So my time is pretty much, it's like being a child again with no boss, no one to tell me when to come and go. And I have been fortunate in that way. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for putting this out there for all of us to appreciate and to enjoy. And thank you, Stephen Hatch, for being so well spoken as a mystic.
You're welcome.
No mistake.
Yeah, yeah, and I gotta just say, you know, I started to make the Unruly Mystic John Muir film. Stephen Hatch was the first person I interviewed in was May of what, 2015, I think, is like when we first met. I actually met you a little, I think I met you in the fall, but you were the first person I met and interviewed, and then you introduced me to, kind of opened up the whole door, and I think you introduced me to Shelton, and that experience, which, you know, was pretty amazing. So we were just, Heather and I were just back in Yosemite a year ago showing the John Muir film at the visitor center. We did some additional filming with Shelton, which is going to end up in the revision of the movie that'll come out at some point later this year. So so Stephen Hatch is a really great person to know, that's for sure. So anybody else want to talk about their experience? Yeah, I think Jane.
I'll speak up. Hi, I'm Jane Engel. I live in Boulder, Colorado. And Roger, I was born and raised in Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, so we've basically changed places here. But I received an email from a friend about this event tonight and about the film also, which I have not seen, and saying that this was something they thought I would enjoy. So I decided to join in. And I'm glad I did. I am also humbled and very impressed by much of what has been said this evening. I have been working from home for the last 5 weeks, which has been wonderful because my home borders on the open space here. I watch the birds and the deer every day. It's wonderful. And I am out walking and hiking every single day, at least once, if not twice. And I've discovered lots of new trails and adventures in my city here. So it's been a blessing for me to be isolated at home. I've found new places and new experiences.
Well, thank you for joining us. So anybody else want to say anything? I see a Trisha Miller there, but now it's a man.
Yeah, this is, could you hear me? My name's Alan Miller.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, so I'm a longtime friend for probably over a quarter of a century with Stephen Hatch. You live maybe a couple hundred feet above and to the west of Stephen. And like one of the previous people said about watching the sunrise, it's like being at sea. From where we live, we could watch the sun come up, the moon come up. But one of the things that I've been doing is just sleeping out on my deck, and just, it's wonderful not to hear the incessant planes flying overhead all night long. So that's kind of nice, but just looking up at the stars at night, especially when it's dark, it connects you to a world that John Muir would have known if he was outside sleeping at night. And something I highly recommend, especially this time of year. The skies have been clear here. It's been not a lot of moonlight, and yeah, something I would suggest.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys noticed, but with I was reading about this, is that the Earth vibrates naturally. There's a natural vibration, and there's a vibration that we cause also to the Earth with our movements of our trucks and our traffic. And it's actually quieted it down enough that the geologists are able to like pick up different vibrations that they normally can't hear. You know, these little tremors, these natural tremors. So we actually have we're actually affecting the Earth by how we move on it, which I thought was really interesting, like ants, you know, just vibrating. So it does have that sense of really things have like calmed down. I know for a lot of us who have gone up into the high country or gone into the wilderness, where there is no cell phone, there's no electricity, I always kind of know there's that sense of like things are really much calmer, right? And you notice that too, if the power ever goes out, it's like, wow, there's this vibrational thing that's kind of like just calmed down. So in a sense, I think that's really helped us to find this connection right now. And once again, it just reminds me again of, you know, the world that John Muir was in when he came out west, where he made his long travels. You know, it was a very different world than the world we're living in. And so was anybody else in our panel? I see a Blake and I see a Natalie. Do you guys want to say anything? I think you're on your phones. If you do, just unmute yourself. So I'd like to, I'm kind of looking at the clock here. It's almost 7. We're going to have another panelist join us. I'm wondering if we just want to take it just like a 5-minute break, and then we can come back again. And what I'd like to do with the second half of this is to get a little deeper into the relevancy of John Muir. I think we've kind of been floating on that a little bit, and go deeper into the spirituality of why he's relevant today, and then how we can use that, his example and the spirituality, to kind of put that out into a larger world. You know, there are people that really need this right now, and we can see a lot of people in pain and doing things that are pretty childish and pretty dangerous for the rest of us. So I just want to kind of think about that, you know, as we take this break, to come back with and maybe come up with some things. You know, this film for me has been a way to, you know, reach out to a group of people, and especially younger people, and say, you know, you have the capacity to be a mystic. You have the capacity to be unruly and to do something with it. You don't have to wait until you're in your 50s and a gray hair to have those experiences. And if you start to do it now in your 20s and 30s, you know, you can really affect change and kind of get ahead of the curve.